Soil conservation was born from the Dust Bowl. In 1935, U.S. legislation formed what is now Natural Resources Conservation Service, formerly Soil Conservation Service. In 1937, Illinois passed the Soil and Water Conservation District Act. Then in 1943, Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District was formed.
I feel really fortunate to be able to work for an agency that has such a long history. And I think most people know that we were born out of the Dust Bowl days of the 30s. And when you had a resource need and the people started to see that need and the federal government stepped in. But kind of like the old joke is when the federal government says, we're here to help you, it really doesn't work if we don't have local people. And so when we look at that all the way back in the 30s, the idea is to have these trained professionals, but then have the local people that could guide us. So even though we were born just a few years earlier, the idea always was to have local people helping the federal government decide what to focus on for these varied needs around the country. So the Soil and Water Conservation District Act was an important part of the origin of our agency, and we've sustained that kind of a partnership now for more than 80 years as we see farmers in each individual soil and water district form those districts and get involved and stay involved. And it's one of the longest, most sustaining partnerships that you see in conservation, and I think is the envy of all other groups.
Locally speaking, from 1940 to 1943, Charles A. Britt personally contacted many landowners and operators in promoting the organization of our own soil conservation district. He had assistance along the way, and in early 1943, a petition was submitted to the state of Illinois for the establishment of the Champaign County Soil Conservation District. Charles A. Britt, Roy A. Parrott, Howard Love, Frank Gordon, and Albert Martin served as the first Champaign County Soil Conservation District Board of Directors.
You know, being a young man from a farm background and in southern Illinois, where there's a lot of hills and a lot of trees, my earliest memories of driving through Champaign County were looking around. First thing, where are the trees? Where are the hills? And thinking what it must be like to farm land like this that just is so forgiving and didn't look like there were any issues. But when I came up to Champaign to come to school at the University of Illinois, I found out that what you can see from the road isn't the entire county. There is more diversity out there. There are some trees, there's some water courses. And then I also learned that there's also a lot of different things that are still issues up here, like what to do with the water, how to take care of the soil, how can you get the water off some of this flatter ground fast enough, and then you don't want to cause flooding problems somewhere else. So as I started to realize that part of it, that's also when I started to be able to understand and appreciate the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District. When I moved over here to Champaign County in 2003, and to be right next door to the office and to say, wow, well, what an innovative office they had. They're hardworking folks, creative, and doing things through the Soil and Water District and really making that partnership work within RCS. And even though things have changed a lot over the years, I still see this active Soil and Water Conservation District going on out there. And as I mentioned the nutrient loss reduction strategy a while ago, that's one of those things. This group just has stepped up, constantly helping us learn more and more about the behavior of the nutrients and about things that we can do in conservation that I didn't even think were needed when I was a younger person. And now I understand that they are needed, and to watch these dedicated folks to do this, and 75 years, still going strong, thanks to Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District.
There is evidence of the innovation and creativity across the years, from purchasing one of the first computers to developing the STAR program. Here are a few more examples.
We did a lot of things to bring attention to people with the community, especially our legislators. We'd take them on tours, and bus tours, even go out in the field where they're building terraces and get them off the bus and explain everything to them. And have a hard time getting them back on the bus. They liked it. We had an outdoor classroom on those two. We hauled in sand to make a sand dune so they could see what the wind could do with that. Developed the wetlands and planted grasses around it and things. And in the center of it, we made a little kind of classroom where we cut stools from old dead trees and things. And buses could pull up with kids from grade school, park in the Farm Bureau parking lot and use that.
It was an evolving process even back then, but I guess I had an interest in computers because of my engineering background and the like, and saw some demonstrations of what the GIS systems and mapping could do, and I just couldn't wait to get my hands on the technology. So with grants and people and other interested organizations, we were able to put together some of the first GIS layers in the state, even before NRCS was able to supply the software and the hardware for each county. We were fortunate in already utilizing some of the benefits of GIS to help target our conservation programs to individuals, and then to keep track of progress, quite honestly, and generate success maps, I guess you could say.
Champaign County can also claim the first Build Illinois project.
Okay, well, talk about conservation projects. As I recall, didn't you say you had the first Build Illinois project on your farm?
Well, I think we did back in the 1980s, and that was kind of an innovative program. It was a partnership between a farmer and landowner, state of Illinois, and RCS. I'm sure the soil and water conservation districts, with some funding that came attached to it to help us solve a specific problem on a specific field. And the project worked well, and it was a great experience for everybody. And that structure is still in place today. 30 years later, still doing what it's supposed to do. And it was an example of this partnership that we were talking about of various stakeholders trying to solve a problem.
We will visit partnerships later, but let's focus on leadership first. Effective leadership is a key component. Let's look back on our past leaders. What tremendous leaders, innovative, forward-thinking, creative, passionate, and determined. And in most cases, they were found with a simple phone call.
So Steve, tell me about you getting started with the soil and water conservation districts and how that happened. And
Shall we say the Dean of Conservation in Champaign County, Ken Kessler, gave me a call and said that they were interested in somebody that had some interest in conservation, and he wondered if I might be interested in getting involved. And Ken was very influential in my career, shall we say, in soil conservation and with soil and water conservation districts.
I became involved in the district, when I first moved back into the area. I had done some projects with NRCS, and then I was asked to become a district director, and so I accepted, and have been on the board for 15 years now. I do it because I love farming, and I'm interested in how we can move forward.
With strong, committed directors in place, help was needed in the form of employees. But the district didn't always have employees. Help came from technical staff with the USDA Soil Conservation Service. But for a while, these employees were responsible for conservation in several counties. As Kenneth tells us, there was a time when the district had no employees and no money. That's when he approached the county board for financial assistance, and they voted in support. They helped boost Champaign County Soil Water Conservation District to the next level and have supported the district ever since. Harvey Decker, the first employee, started in 1969. Laverne Zier is also known as one of the first employees.
Well, I don't know that it was necessarily myself. I think it was the board and the staff. Had a fantastic staff the entire time that I was there. But, you know, we would just get together and brainstorm and throw out ideas and kind of look at our long-range objectives of, you know, erosion control, water quality, wildlife habitat, and, you know, different people came up with different ideas. And once you come up with your objectives, then you start looking around for people to help you implement and funds to do it with. And I think that's probably how everything evolved. You know, we're the headwaters of several watersheds in the county. One of the long-range goals that we had at the time was to establish a watershed committee for each watershed to address all of the resource concerns in the watershed. So we had watershed committees, and then we had, like you said, the practice committees, like the no-till, filter strips, and of course we worked with Pheasants Forever on that, of course. That was a very nice partnership. We did also work with various committees that the Farm Bureau had set up too. So they had one with Drainage District Commissioners, and so we worked closely with them. So there were a lot of different committees, maybe even of other groups, that we coordinated and collaborated with.
In Champaign County, one of the things that we learned real quickly with Leon and I is there was a limited amount of things that we could do. And we also found out rather quickly that there were a lot of groups that were doing things but didn't really work together. One group might have access to a lot of money to do things, or might have an access to equipment like Pheasants Forever did. Other groups might have access, and we had the access to the farmers because we knew them. But these groups never really got together and never really worked together very closely. So one of the big things that we tried to do, and I know Steve Steerwalt, our chairman for a long time, said, you know, the thing we have to do is to get the right people to sit down in a room and talk together.
And again, if you start with a goal, an objective, and an idea that benefits multiple interest groups, it's very easy to show them what is possible and say, hey, let's cooperate on this. And the Soil and Water District was the perfect coordinating body to bring all the interest groups together to accomplish conservation objectives. Well, farmers have always been interested in conservation, and Champaign County farmers are some of the most progressive I've ever seen. We had the Conservation Reserve Program come with an '85 Farm Bill, and there was filter strips and buffers as a practice. But just putting things out in a newspaper or even a newsletter, it's hard to generate interest that way. But if you send a personalized letter to a landowner with a map and say, this is eligible, are you interested? You get a lot more response. And I think that's where the early GIS efforts and the targeting efforts really made a difference in the amount of conservation that was applied on the land.
Well, as Ken talks about Leon went, in my time on the board, that came into our primary, what I'd call the momentum run of putting in filter strips along the ditch banks. And I remember the goal being there of getting to the point where approximately 70% of the ditch banks in Champaign County we had with some degree of a filter strip. And following upon that was some of the efforts in being able for people to look at putting in a field border if they wanted to put an area in reserve on the edge of one of their parcels that was there for wildlife and other species. And I mean, some of those have been in place now. I think we put ours on our own family farm back in 2000. We did a lot with the field borders in and around the time frame of 2005.
Well, it seems like efforts kind of evolve. When I was first getting involved, T by 2000 was the big thing. You know, trying to get the tolerable soil loss down. And that was a big effort. The Department of Ag had money then and put a lot of money into it, and there were some big changes.
I guess the one program, I guess, that sticks in my mind also is the 1.2 is the most you can do, you know. Of course, that's been superseded by better science, and but at the time, it was certainly an increment towards accurately applying the needed nitrogen. At one time, we actually were allowed to put a decal on every anhydrous tank in the county, which showed the recommended rate versus on your yield goal. During the time that I served the county there, we had the '85 Farm Bill, which you know, dictated to farmers that if they had highly erodible land, they had to, you know, develop a conservation plan. They did see the benefits. They did see that it was a requirement. So, you know, in some ways they didn't have a choice if they wanted to participate in government programs. But they did see a benefit to controlling erosion on their farm, and they willingly cooperated. And I think it's a testament to the progressiveness of Champaign County farmers. They're some of the best in the world, probably.
I started conservation tillage probably in the early 80s. I rented a farm that was pretty rolly, and a lot of gullies, a lot of washes, and it really paid to kind of start no-tilling. Leon Wente was a big influence on me when I was younger. Worked with him on several projects and got to know my way around the conservation programs, and it's been a good thing for me.
We've been comparing soil tests where we have cover crops and where we don't have cover crops to discover the nutrient recycling and to see exactly what's going on there. So we've been experimenting with that. That's one of my biggest things I'm curious about is the nutrient recycling. I think one of the main benefits from cover crops may not necessarily be yield increases, though I think it's possible, but I think reducing input costs may be one of the main benefits that we can really hang our hat on.
You know, I would say, even being one of the younger members on the board, it is a process that has worked from wherever it started all the way back with its origination at the Dust Bowl. I mean, I can sit here and say as a board member, you know, just shy of 50, I have never ran a moldboard plow on our own farm. That is something, I have moldboard plowed for somebody else working for another farmer, but I have never ran a plow on our own farm.
What your experiences are with conservation?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I wasn't very old with my first experience. In fact, it was one of the very first times that I got to go out and plow by myself. As I was plowing, I thought, this isn't working real well. That was a different era. I mean, we were a diversified farm. We grew corn, we grew soybeans, but we had wheat, we had pasture. And as we had moved on to, you know, basically corn and soybeans, and we're doing more intensive tillage, even at that age, I knew that this wasn't going to work long term. And so we started making changes. And so we went to a chisel plow, we went to no-till, and it's just been a constant evolution over time, trying to find the best fit for the time and the technology that was available. So what about you, Steve? How did you get started with it?
Kind of my first introduction to conservation actually came almost through the landowner. He had a goal for that farm to leave it in better shape than when he got it. And I thought about that. Why was he so interested in it? And kind of made me start to think about conservation. And
yeah. Well, you know, of course, in those days, our tools were limited. If you think about that, I mean, we didn't have the planters that could plant in a residue. We certainly didn't have the herbicides that allow us to do that kind of work. And so it's an evolutionary process because we got better equipment, we got herbicides that made those jobs easier to do, and so therefore we're more likely to do it. And so that's kind of where we are today. You know, hope we can continue that process. You know,
do you remember the dirt blowing back in the day?
Oh, absolutely. I remember the dirt blowing and the snow that would turn black. Yeah. And putting strips out there to try to interrupt the dirt. Going out and working strips in the field. And waterways that were full of silt. Yeah. And ditches that were full of silt from that. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, I remember spots and parts of fields that you know, Champaign County is nice and flat, but it's not all nice and flat. And parts of that it is not sustainable to do tillage on those acres. You have to do something different. And like I said, we have the ability to do that now.
Yeah, I remember you had a strip till bar, one of the first ones.
Well, what's an interesting story about that is I discovered after the first year that you had to have some kind of a guidance system for strip till. Well, this was back before auto steer was very good and very affordable. So what do you use for a guidance system out there? And so what I did was I took a electric one-row planter, mounted it in the middle of the toolbar, and I planted wheat in the fall. And so that wheat germinated, and then the next spring I had a marker of wheat that matched up with the toolbar, and I used that for several years.
You had a stripe.
I had a stripe. It worked pretty well. It worked pretty well, and it was a very, very low tech guidance system. You still had to steer it, but you could stay on the right rows, and that was really important to make that all work.
There is so much we haven't touched on. So much has happened in this thriving district over 75 years, but let's pause and think to the future.
One of the projects that we're currently working on is called the STAR project, and STAR stands for Saving Tomorrow's Agriculture Resources. And the purpose of the STAR program is to help farmers take inventory of their current farming practices and identify ways to increase their stewardship. The STAR program was born from the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. And so the original idea behind that was to help farmers adopt practices to help nutrient losses, nitrate and phosphorus. So that was the original intent of the STAR program, but it also has other uses. We use it to help promote farmers. So farmers who may be interested in getting more farmland and leasing more land, if you're part of the STAR program and you can show that you have implemented practices to help maintain the farm, well, that would be a good thing to add to your resume. Another benefit is the idea that the consumers are demanding food, that comes from sustainable sources. And so if they are asking for this, we think there may be a need to identify those farmers who are doing these practices, so then they can get some of those benefits. Those are the three main reasons that we're doing the STAR program.
And state funding definitely affected soil and water conservation districts around the state. But in Champaign County, we've really been fortunate because we've always had great board members that wanted to move ahead, and rather than giving up and waiting on the state, just kind of told us, well, if the state doesn't have money, go out and find some other money.
And probably the thing that was most challenging is as we've went through some of the ebbs and flows with the fiscal status at the state level, is watching our funding deteriorate. You start to develop programs that you can implement and put in place and get people in place as far as employees and make a commitment to them to help administer the programs and get conservation on the ground. I mean, that'll be another buzz phrase that I will never forget out of the Leon Wente area is, we're getting conservation on the ground. And so I think the biggest challenge as I think about our soil and water district is making sure that we can keep it sustainable. I know that there are enough people in Champaign County that have the passion for this to be, a better community that we leave for our children than what we came into, that is there. But it's a matter of working through the complexities of structure and administration to make sure we have set in Champaign County a sustainable plan to finance and administer conservation going into the future.
I think the thing that we need to focus on or refocus on is soil erosion. After last spring, there was a lot of soil loss to wind and water. I just don't know how long we can continue to let that happen. And so I think that's something that we need to focus on. Water quality, I think, is a function of soil health. That's also a very big issue, probably the biggest issue. To me, when we have water that's polluted with nitrates and phosphorus, to me that's a symptom of poor soil health. And so I think we need to get back and think about reducing tillage, trying to reduce soil erosion.
Well, I just hope we can keep the community as a whole involved in protecting our natural resources.
No matter how many times we update our long-range plan, it always comes back to the same soil and water goals. We will continue our educational and outreach efforts to provide leadership and program coordination to help people conserve, improve, and sustain our natural resources.